So we don't have to worry about some of the details. You can hit pause on some of these, but there were, 2002, some campers that were made sick, 2003, some patrons at a restaurant became ill, 2003, a retirement center, some more people got sick, 2 died in this retirement center from pre-washed spinach. And as I said before, they all came from Salinas Valley. No, they didn't. They all came within a reasonable distance of the Salinas Valley because we are the salad bowl of the world. And it wasn't really the case, but that's the way the news does see it. And that's the way the legal teams see it. If you're anywhere, arguably in the Central Coast area, you call it the Salinas Valley. In 1998, there's the FDA Guide to Minimize Microbial Food Safety Hazards for Fruits and Vegetables. And this document was specifically designed to assist growers and packers in the implementation of safer manufacturing practices. And so the industry looked at this. It was largely leafy greens, especially lettuce, and the tomato industries that were kind of on the radar of the FDA because tomatoes and leafy greens seem to be the ones that were the problems in the 90s, more so than other fresh vegetables. And so the industry certainly looked at this. They were able to modify their good agricultural practices using some of the information from this, but industry went on as usual. In 2004, there still are these problems that are happening largely from the postage stamp small farms and small growers. These weren't being traced back to the big companies. They were being mostly traced to small growers, but some of them were owned by big companies. Even though they were small growers, they were bought out or owned by some bigger company. So that created another issue. So the FDA says finally, we got to do something. So they wrote a letter to the lettuce and tomato industries, specifically trying to make them aware of the FDA's concerns regarding these continued outbreaks and encouraging the industries to review their practices. So what did the industries primarily do? They primarily went, this is a bunch of crap. They don't know what they're doing in Washington. They're just blowing smoke. Go blank yourself, FDA. But there were a few people that said, we better take this seriously because if we don't, we're going to have a problem. The federal government will come in with their own set of rules and regulations. And you're right, they don't really know how to run a lettuce operation. They don't know what they're doing in terms of growing lettuce or strawberries. We need to do something ourselves, but it wasn't gaining much traction. At the time, there was a group called the Lettuce Research Board, which collected money. It was like 4 cents per carton or carton equivalent of lettuce sold in California would get to this group to fund research at University of California and other places, the US Department of Agriculture. We spent a lot of money from this 4 cents per carton of lettuce that went to research. And so the Lettuce Research Board was in charge. And I still remember vividly some of the arguments going on about this FDA letter and what should we do to respond to it. And there wasn't a good consensus. There were some people who said we have to do something. We need to show the FDA we're doing something, and others saying, go away, FDA. So in 2005, they're calling this the Dole E. coli outbreak because Dole owned a company that had the outbreak. It was a small company. It wasn't directly Dole. Dole doesn't grow anything, at least not in lettuce. And so the lettuce was being sent, or spinach, excuse me, but it was being sent to other customers in other states. There were a bunch of people sick, 2 cases of HUS, what is it, hepatic uremic disease or syndrome or something. Look it up. I can't remember off the top of my head. Doesn't matter. It's kidney disease. It is a failure of the kidneys because of this brand new strain, at least from a public perspective, O157H7. The O is the letter O, not a zero. O157H7. This is the last straw that really changed things. Before, when you get sick from E. coli, you throw up, you have diarrhea, whatever, it's no fun, but you get over it and you go on with your life. And it was rare that it would actually be fatal or permanently damage you in the way that O157H7 can. So now, a bacterium that is in everybody's guts. We all have E. coli. We need E. coli. It is an essential part of who we are. There are more cells inside of you that are E. coli than every other cell in your entire body. There's a lot of E. coli in your gut. And that's a good thing. It's when we get an E. coli strain that doesn't work well with our body that gives us problems that we have diarrhea or vomiting. And when you get O157H7, the way its waste products are handled in the body, when our body tries to deal with it, we can't properly detoxify it in our kidneys, and it ends up damaging our kidneys rather than just peeing it out. And that's where the HUS comes from. A whole new reason to add scariness to really make food safety a public national news issue. So the cases were in Oregon, Wisconsin, and Montana, or excuse me, Michigan, sorry. And it was statistically associated with eating the Dole prepackaged lettuce. It wasn't Dole, it was a company owned by Dole, but Dole has the deep pockets. And they finally found the smoking gun where they found E. coli O157H7 in a bag. They found it. And that's pretty hard to do. By the time you harvest the lettuce, you eat the lettuce, you throw away the bag, who's going to have a bag left over? And who's going to remember everything they ate for the last week or 10 days when they're sick as a dog? It's hard to put the evidence together and create this smoking gun evidence, but it happens. So the word adulterated means to produce food in an unsafe manner. So the FDA cited research linking some or all of the outbreaks to sewage exposure, animal waste, or other contaminated water sources. There was a lot of controversy around this. It really wasn't clear what was going on. The idea that there could have been septic systems nearby in some cases, well, there were. Was that the cause? We don't know. There were animals being produced nearby. And we've always done that in ag. When you've got fields of crops growing, there's dairy cows right next door over the fence, or there's pigs or chickens or whatever. We grow our crops wherever the fence stops for the animals, you start growing your plants. We don't do that anymore because of these problems. We need buffer zones. We need to get the animals away from the food crops that are going into the human consumption channels for human food. The FDA considers adulterated any ready-to-eat crops produced under unsanitary conditions. It's a little more than that. It's more than just unsanitary conditions. It could be in an unsafe manner, which could include other things. But certainly there is a lot of language about adulterating food or making it unsafe. So another letter comes out. In light of continuing outbreaks associated with fresh and fresh cut lettuce and other leafy greens, particularly from California, we are issuing this second letter to reiterate our concerns and to strongly encourage firms in your industry to get their together, to review their current procedures for operations, whatever. Yeah, they were basically saying, get your act together or else. And you could see the tone change in the Leafy Greens Research Board, the group of people that were digging their heels in, saying the FDA doesn't know what they're talking about. It's these small growers. They can't be making us change everything because there's a few bad actors. They've got to go after the bad actors. We shouldn't be doing anything. They were starting to lose the argument. More people were saying, we have to do something. We have to do something, or the FDA will shove something down our throats that will be way worse than what we would come up with on our own. We have to show them we're doing something. And it was good because the Leafy Greens Research Board created the Leafy Greens Marketing Agreement. And it was a group of shippers and handlers that were all signatories. They all signed this agreement that we will only buy lettuce if it is produced under this LGMA set of rules. It was voluntary, but as soon as this happened, who were the signatories? The big fish, the Walmarts and the Krogers and the Safeways and all the big companies that were in the pipeline of buying lettuce insisted that if they're buying leafy greens, it is going to be produced using the food safety guidelines established by the LGMA. It's only voluntary, so there's still, the small guys could still do whatever they wanted because there was no law that said you had to do it, but you couldn't sell your lettuce unless you had small restaurants or other customers. So what was the LGMA based on? Well, they largely cited information from that 1998 FDA guideline document that I mentioned earlier. That was something that was really smart to do. We're saying, we hear you, FDA. You've given us some data, and we're going to use that data. We're going to cite that data, and we're going to create this set of rules that takes into consideration your data and also is something we can live with that works with the industry. And it's really good that we did do that, because a few years after the LGMA was established as a voluntary program, more and more companies started getting on board, and the federal government started making noise about something they're going to do called the Food Safety Modernization Act. And so we lobbied very hard with the federal government, with the FDA, to include our Leafy Greens Marketing Agreement rules for this new LGMA. And it worked. The LGMA contains quite a bit of language that was adopted from the Leafy Greens Marketing Agreement. So there was a reassessment of current manure composting regulations that was part of this. And certainly manure compost, where you have animal manure, steer manure, things like that, chicken manure going on to crops, you have to make sure it's composted and prepared in such a way that you're not introducing human pathogens into the mix, things like E. coli, which can live and do live inside of farm animals. An assessment of septic tank systems that may leak or overflow into agricultural ditches, creeks, etc. An assessment of farm worker access to portable toilets and hand washing facilities. This has been updated largely since these outbreaks. An assessment of locations of fields known to flood frequently, or even if it's not frequently, if there is any flood event, you need to look at that. how are you going to analyze and determine what are you going to do? How long is that portion of the flooded field be affected? And you can't use the produce out of that section of the field. How long? How do you make those decisions? An assessment for the need or of the need for mandatory gaps and or HACCP plans. Mandatory. Instead of the leafy green marketing agreement, voluntary, this was looking at a need for making it mandatory because the small growers could still bypass the rules. The small growers could still sell into restaurants and other things and get around the rules. And everybody knew that couldn't go on forever. That was going to stop. 2006, an outbreak at Wendy's. E. coli 021H19. This isn't the 0157H7 that we're so familiar with. This is another one that can cause the HUS kidney failure disease. And likely this was also something that got into the Wendy's restaurants through California lettuce. Another Dole outbreak. Now you've got the Dole baby spinach. It wasn't Dole baby spinach. It was packed under an organic brand that Dole had recently purchased. But of course, Dole's got the big pocket, so they put a picture of Dole baby spinach right here, even though that is not really the truth. Dole wasn't the company. It was Natural Selections, I believe. And Dole just had recently purchased Natural Selections to have a foothold in the organic market. So it was a small San Juan Bautista-based organic company, and they found this E. coli 0157H7, and this was the one that exploded. 204 persons infected, 26 states, 102 hospitalized, 31 with HUS, and 5 deaths. So all these other things that I'm telling you about, all these other stories, and a couple people died here, a few HUS there. In terms of public health, it was background noise. This one made food safety headline news, and it has been ever since. So for the last 15 years, food safety, if there is an outbreak, it gets top billing on the national news channels and social media news outlets. And this is largely the one that pushed it over the edge, because this was a big deal. So the E. coli 0157 was isolated from 13 packages of Dole-owned spinach. There were DNA fingerprints that matched the bacteria found in the ill people. The same strain was found on one of 4 farms that supplied spinach to the manufacturer. They looked at cow pies or the animals in the area, water sources, wild pig guts. They looked all over the place and were able to find that it was in the area. What was the actual source that got it onto the spinach and was able to spread it to so much more? Likely the spreading must have occurred in the processing plant or in contaminated water that was sprayed on the lettuce. But I don't know that they ever were able to convince everybody exactly how it happened. But it happened. Also in 2006, 150 sickened in 7 states because of an outbreak. Again, lettuce grown in California. So this is civil litigation, not criminal litigation. Everything you know about the law probably came from TV, and that's criminal litigation or criminal acts, criminal law. So you break criminal law and the penalty is often going to jail, maybe probation. and you are violating criminal law in most of the things that you see on TV, theft and murder and things of that sort. Civil litigation is contract law, workers' compensation insurance, and food safety, things that aren't intentional criminal acts, but they are things where people in some way were harmed. And you may know the phrase beyond a reasonable doubt, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. That is criminal litigation. The proper term, and you should know this, the proper term in civil litigation is preponderance of evidence. Where does the evidence weigh? If there's 51% likely that the company did something that caused a person to get sick, 49% that the company didn't do anything, doesn't matter that there's reasonable doubt, doesn't matter at all. The preponderance of evidence, the weight of evidence says, yeah, it's probably more likely the company did. So there's what's called strict liability. If it even smells like the company may have done something wrong, or even if they did everything right, but something went wrong anyway, you're liable, you're responsible. And if you handled that lettuce or strawberries or whatever in any way, you are potentially liable. Now, not absolutely liable. So you grow the lettuce, you might be responsible. You harvest it, you might be responsible. You transport, cool, store, warehouse that lettuce, you might be partially responsible. You package it, you bear some responsibility. You're the supermarket, you might be partially responsible. So where does the responsibility ultimately lie? Generally with whichever company along that chain I just described that has the most money. The deeper pockets pay. Is that fair? I'm not going to get into that argument here, but a good attorney will definitely make an argument and be able to get compensation for injured parties, the people who got sick. They will get compensation from a company that's able to pay it. That's the point. And just because you were responsible, you're the big company in this chain. If you're the one that's wealthy in this chain, you should have been looking out for those other smaller companies, the ones that did the cooling for you, that may have caused the problem. So it gets really difficult. So the only defense is prevention, period. You can't just wish it away. Well, if we're doing everything right, nothing's going to happen, and have the blinders on to what everybody else is doing before you or after you or what your competitors are doing. You have to pay attention. You manufacture a product that causes someone to be sick, you're going to pay. Bottom line. Even if you didn't manufacture it, you're just somewhere in that chain, you might be paying anyway. So in that Dole E. coli, the 2006 one, there were 16 suits filed. Dole and, yes, Natural Selection Foods were the primary defendants, but I just mentioned some other possible defendants. What about the grower? Did they do things wrong? Dole is the owner. Natural Selections is the one that processed it and put it in a bag. What about the harvesters? What about the coolers? What about the grocery stores? Do they have any responsibility? It depends. It depends on what their role was in all of this. Not going to worry about the outbreak there. The discovery arsenal, this is just a list of things that an attorney is going to look for. Interrogatories or questionnaires, requests for production records, requests for inspection of facilities and farms, requests for admission to different regions where they might try to claim this is proprietary, this is trade secrets, you can't go there. Well, they can file requests to go in. They might not be able to take photographs, but they might be able to take samples and do inspections. Third-party subpoenas to get witnesses, et cetera. These are just the things that are used by attorneys to gather evidence, to try to figure out what happened and where did it all go wrong, where somebody got sick. So let's take another quick break.